Sure, it's actually recording before we start.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so Dark Bleatings, everyone. I am here with Bev Vincent today, who I'm super excited to talk to. For the uninitiated, Bev is a writer of basically everything, from what I can gather: non-fiction, fiction, a little bit of poetry. I read as well, Bev, at some point, teeny
A
tiny
little bit.
bit. I know that you blog, edit, do interviews. So I know that you've also been part of the judging for a few literary awards. So basically, you've just conquered the entire sphere, is how I like to describe you to people. So yes, welcome to Happy Goat Horror. How are you?
I'm doing just great, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Yes, I'm so excited to talk to you because I'm an avid non-fiction reader as well, and we have a common interest of Stephen King. So that's how I found you initially, and also I've submitted to a few anthologies that you're in, which I didn't get into, but yeah, I always buy those anthologies anyway. So I've been reading you for quite a bit. Um, I would like to start with um, your sort of style, because you don't seem to box yourself in to genre in your fiction, or specific style in particular. You do play with a lot of like different elements and things and crossover kind of stuff. Um, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how you approach thinking through your stories, between something like the Lady of the Lost Lake and let me think. The is it? Well, hang on, I've written it down. I can't read my writing. The Patience of Cain. I remember reading that one. They're like quite different stories.
So I guess I would say I started off mostly writing horror fiction.
Hmm.
Um, I was heavily under the influence of, King's Night Shift kind of stories. So Lady of Lost Lake is what I would say something that's influenced by that book and those types of stories.
Hmm.
But most of what I read these days, and most of what I watch on, streaming services is crime fiction. And I
Hmm.
really, really like detective stories and police procedurals and things like that. And so I've written quite a few of the Kane stories for Benjamin Kane as the private investigator, former police officer. I've even written a couple of things at novel length about him and his brother and things that haven't been published yet, though.
Hmm.
And I found myself as I got really into writing more and more crime fiction that even when I started out writing a horror story, quite often it would take a right turn at some point into being ultimately a crime story.
Hmm.
So I wrote the ghost story where it's a ghost investigator investigating a ghost crime kind of thing.
Was it
Uh,
this one?
yes, exactly that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. So there's been lots of times especially in the last 5 or 6 years where all intentions to write something that's a horror story and it just ends up going into a crime genre.
It makes it interesting though, because I never know, when I think you're gonna zig, you zag. So it's really fun. I feel that way about the Langoliers a little bit, because that's sort of posited with like a horror thing, but then it's very about the mystery. Um, I recently really enjoyed this which this one slipped me by. I'm normally pretty good at keeping up with your releases, but I somehow missed this. And then I think you mentioned it somewhere. I was like, oh wow, I missed one. And this is a nice little detective mystery story. And I don't typically read this genre very much, but I thought that the pacing, because it's like quite svelte for a typical detective thing kind of thing. Um, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And I loved the ending. I loved how everything was resolved. I don't want to spoil it for anyone because I'd really like everyone to pick it up. But did you start your with how you were going to end it and work backwards for something like this, or did you work it out as you went along?
That story has had a really strange evolution. I think I write a bit about it in the afterword. It started out a long time ago as a story that was called Black and White,
Mm-hmm.
and the concept was is that the sort of wrapping frame story is told in color. And
Mhm.
this guy gets hired to go out into this sort of countryside manor to work on a crime. And as he drives, all the color sort of bleeds away from everything. And he's in this black and white noir world of, Bogart kind of movie
Mhm.
situation. And I had that story for quite a long time. And I think I probably submitted it to a few places and never got any traction. And
Mhm.
so, very early in the lockdown, I went back and I looked at it again and I said, I'm going to completely rewrite this and
Mhm.
get rid of all of that sort of, color black and white, which was a little bit hard to depict, you know,
Mhm.
in words. Might work well as a video clip or something like that, but not so well in text. And turned it more into just sort of a straight, uh, what I think of as a noir whodunit.
Mhm.
Uh, I can't remember. I don't think I had the sort of the solution to the story. Actually, I think in the original version, the solution to the story was completely different. And as I was rewriting it and expanding it, I came up with this little bit of research data that I thought was interesting that
Mhm.
I sort of built the story around. And then I decided I was going to self-publish it.
Mhm.
I laid it all out and put it up on Amazon and made the ebook and the paperback book and just sort of threw out in the world and see what became of it.
Yeah, I love it. I read it all in one sitting, and yeah, I would yeah, if anyone looking for a recommendation for Bev, if you might maybe not as familiar, I would recommend this one wholeheartedly, especially if you like the mystery genre. Do you typically plot with your stories, Bev, or
No,
yeah?
never. I would say virtually never, and to the extent that I almost never know how they're going to turn out, which means that I've got a fair number of dead end stories kicking around in my hard drive. But they're not dead forever. Sometimes you come up with that
Mhm.
sort of crucial thing that you overlooked the first time when you were working on it that you can go back and resurrect it from the dead.
Mhm.
But no, I tend to just sort of sit down. For the past couple of years, I would say primarily with pen and paper for my short stories. I use like a ledger, and I'll just sit down and start writing by hand and write right through to the end of the first draft, and then go back and edit it by hand, and then dictate it into the computer, which is an editing process in and of itself,
Mhm.
and then proceed digitally from there. But usually it's just one step at a time, and you might reach a point where you have to sit down and give it a think. And I'll go to bed at night, and when I wake up in the morning, I'll have an idea for what I want to do next, and
Mhm.
that's how it works.
I love the sort of pantser method because it's just so risky. Once you start, I'm usually okay. I can usually get to the end of a short story, but if I'm going for something longer, I've written myself into a lot of corners. I like you. I have lots of unfinished things on my hard drive, just waiting for answers, but I'm sure they'll come. Um, if we could talk a little bit about Dissonant Harmonies, I loved The Dead of Winter. It was I've seen other people describing it as well. It's just like a really fun story, and we got like mystery elements in here as well. And then I read the stories first, and then I read all of the surrounding notes and everything from you and Brian. And so I saw that you gave each other music playlists to write to. Um, were you familiar with much of what Brian put on your list before he gave it to you?
For the most part, I mean, Brian and I have talked about music every time we get together or even
Mhm.
online. We have a lot of common interests. And then we have the sort of orthogonal interest list too, where there are things that I really like that he's not much familiar with, and vice versa. Most of what he gave me, I was familiar with at least by reputation. It
Mhm.
wasn't always things that I would have found on my own iTunes library.
Mhm. Yeah.
Some of it was a little bit challenging, let me say.
Yeah, there's some
I'm not.
heavier stuff.
Yeah, the heavy metal stuff I've sort of grown into. That rap stuff is less, even now these days, less to my liking.
Mhm.
Um, but it was, you know, we the original idea is that we were going to make an anthology, and each story was
Mhm.
going to be inspired by by a song.
Mhm.
And the more we talked about it, we just decided we'd do this playlist thing. And the only rule was that when you were working on this project, that you would only listen to the other person's playlist. And the story didn't have to be specifically inspired by any song or songs. It's just, this is what was going on in the background as you were writing. And yeah, so that's the story that the winner. It's the longest piece of fiction that I've published so far, and
Yes.
I really like how it turned out, and it's gotten a good reaction from most people who've read it. So yeah, I'm fond of it.
Yeah, people really like it, and people seem to really like the idea behind how you guys put this together. I was wondering if I can't write to music if it's got lyrics in it at all. I get too distracted and start typing the lyrics. I was wondering if you felt like your story was affected in tone in any way because of what you were listening to.
I can't say for sure one way or the other. I always write first draft to music, and it can be any kind of music. And I just sort of get into a zone where I'm not even hearing the music anymore. You know, entire albums can go by and I'll just realize I haven't heard a note of the music. But it's going on back there, so it's probably doing something. I think Brian was a little bit more deliberate. In his story, there was one song on the playlist I gave him in particular that he cites as being his primary inspiration for the song that he wrote, for the story that he wrote. We're considering a second a Dissonant Harmonies too, and the playlist that Brian has given me is completely instrumental this time.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's different. And what's funny is I'd almost done the same thing for him, but then I sort of shifted gears, and I look for things that I think he probably won't be all that familiar with, and maybe will shake him a little bit out of his normal zone. I like techno electronic, trance, psychedelic music when I'm writing, and so I threw a few things like that in there for him.
I hope that wields interesting results, and I'm looking forward to Dissonant Harmonies too. That's exciting to hear.
So I've written a follow-up already to Dead of Winter that's called Dead of Night, and it's the same characters a year and a half or so later after the events of the first one, with a new but related situation going on. And so I've finished that one. Now, whether that ends up in Dissonant Harmonies 2 or I'm contemplating writing a third one, and sort of making a trilogy bundle that would be essentially a fix-up novel, perhaps.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had any plans for writing something novel length, or if you're hanging out here with novels and short stories, that's good because that gives us loads to read. But yeah, I was wondering if you're planning a novel at any point.
I have written quite a few novels. My agent has shopped 2 around and not met with any success. He's got one right now that I'm particularly fond of, that is in submission. It's had a few rejections so far, but we're still holding out some hope for that one. I am just about to embark on a brand new one. I've got all the research, I've got all the characters, and now I just have to get it written.
Cool. Oh well, I hope we get to read those someday, Bev. If people are too silly to publish them, you have to just do it self-publish. So go that mode so that we get to read them eventually.
Yeah, Brian Freeman, who used to do a Cemetery Dance and now has his own Levidian press, he's a really big proponent of the novel that my agent is shopping around now. And so, if that doesn't work out, then maybe I can knock on Brian's door and say, "Hey, you're a publisher."
Yeah, that is the joy of because the indie publishing sector is so huge now. There's so many layers to it. There's usually somewhere that you can go if traditional publishing box themselves in somewhere and they don't want to take a chance on something else. But oh yeah, well, I'm gonna just be like rubbing my hands together in glee, just waiting for the novel debut then, Beth.
But what's really funny is that the main character in this book is somebody who became a writer in the mid part of his life, and he went through the same thing. He tried submitting a book and it didn't get anywhere, and he found this small press, and the small press published it, and it sort of took off a life on its own, and then that sort of shoehorned him into a mainstream publishing career. So
it happens. Yeah, it's a viable route now into traditional publishing, isn't it? If you go the indie way, if you have a little bit of a roadblock.
Yep.
With your when you're sitting down to write, or when you're thinking ahead to writing, do you have a routine, and does it differ between sort of like different types of story lengths? Like if you're going, is a short story different process wise to like a novella or a novel for you?
For novels, I would say are different. I'm less likely to start writing a novel by hand.
Hmm.
The Dead of Winter I wrote completely by hand. I filled up one complete Moleskine ledger with beginning to end on that one. Short stories, I'm still writing primarily by hand. There's just a different rhythm, I think, I find. And I can do it anywhere. I can go over to the local coffee shop and sit outside and just write. And
Hmm.
with a novel, I'm pretty much at the computer.
Hmm.
Um, I, I really need to be able to sort of skim around back and forth to, look up details and get continuity and things like that, pick up my research documents and stuff like that. But in terms of time of day, it's all done in the morning.
Hmm.
I get up quite early. I'm a 5 o'clock in the morning kind of person. Because I've got a day job, so I have to do things in the morning, and then I have breakfast with my wife, and then get ready for the day job.
Gosh, that's an early start to 5 a.m. I'm still awake sometimes then, depending. Just the weekend, you know. I have started to get a bit tired now. As the older I get, the earlier I have to go to bed on the weekend, even when I'm trying to push it. Um, right. So when you're sorry, I'm looking down at my notes because I have so many questions for you. I'm just jumping around trying to decide which ones to ask you. um, when you're writing fiction, is there any element in particular that you care the most about, like character or theme, or does any of that come later for you on a redraft or an edit?
For me, like to start a short story, for example, I
Mm-hmm.
need to have basically three things. I need to know two ideas
Mm-hmm.
that sort of come together in an interesting way. And then I need to have the main character or characters and what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And as once I have those things, then it's just a matter of stirring the pot and seeing where that all goes. I'm not really thinking about thematic stuff usually. And the characters, I mean, quite often, I mean, I've got several different groups of stories that have the same characters in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of like going back to familiar folks. I have one series that I'm really quite fond of. It's the five uh, very inept crooks, and they always get themselves into a mess when they're trying to do one of their capers. And I just love going back to those guys and seeing what new way they can mess things up. And so for that, I mean, there's the caper, which I always have to come up with sort of a interesting caper, but primarily I just want to see what these guys are going to get up to and how they're going to interact with each other and get into trouble and get out of trouble.
That kind of humor really appeals to my own sense of humor, the kind of things I find funny. Because I was telling my friend about this book, and I said this is in no way written like a comedy or anything, but the main character is very funny to me. I just get like a general air of he's just got a funny personality, and I couldn't really explain why, but I assumed that it was your personality, like coming through in the prose
I
maybe.
maybe a little bit, but sometimes we write characters who are smarter or funnier or something or more than we are. I do like that sort of sarcastic, the Humphrey Bogart kind of detective, Sam Spade. They're always got something funny to say. They don't take anything too seriously. There's a show I'm watching right now on Apple TV called Bad Monkey, which is based on a Carl Hiaasen crime novel, and it's Vince Vaughn. And I just love the sarcasm of that character. He talks a lot, and very sophisticated but irreverent sentences that keep coming out of him. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, I just like a just slight little tongue-in-cheek element to a character in a serious story, because I don't know, for some reason it makes it a little bit funnier to me than if it's like the point is that it's funny, if that makes any sense. Sorry, I'm a bit rambly. The story, so just to touch very quickly on your story, Jurisdiction in the Perfectly Fine Neighborhood. I was so happy when you submitted to this, by the way, Bev, because as I say, I've been a fan of yours for such a long time. I was texting Steve going, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe." So for anyone who doesn't know, the theme of that anthology is that it's set in a universe where ghosts are real and everyone knows about them, and it's just sort of like part of every day-to-day routine and stuff. And yes, Jurisdiction is about a ghost that's been murdered, and that was such a funny twist on the entire thing, because of all, I don't know, I think of all plots I was expecting to get in the submissions, that wasn't one of them. Did you start with did you start with the theme, or did you already have that kind of idea when you did this one?
This was a case where I saw the call for submissions, and I thought, yeah, I'm familiar with the sort of framework of the world. How and when I approach themed anthologies, typically my first thought is, what can I do different? What can I do that's probably not what other writers are going to do? And so you're right, the idea of the murdered ghost was where I started. And then the concept of, okay, how does a human being can interrogate ghosts in this reality, but who has jurisdiction, which is where the title came from.
Yeah.
And really there was a dead police detective ghost who clearly had a better shot at getting information than the live one did. So that's where my mind went with that one.
It was just such a and it's written straight, which is what makes the actual idea funnier to me, because we had quite a few really good like ghost detective style submissions for that one, but yeah, the concept that you came up with was very original for a universe that already pre-existed as well. Yeah, I really enjoy. I just kept picturing just like a dead ghost, and it just tickled me every time. It's hard to think outside of the box sometimes with a themed anthology, isn't it? If the theme is zombies or ghosts, and sometimes I think, oh, I've thought of an original idea, and then I'm like, wait a minute, have other people probably already thought outside of the box, but into this exact box that I've just thought in? Okay, so if we could talk a little bit about your experience as editor on Flight or Fright, which I really loved this, because talking of themed anthologies, this is scary things that can happen on a plane, basically, collection, scary flight stories. And I haven't read another anthology with this particular theme, so it was very refreshing when it came out, because I didn't know where I was going to get in here. The the process of sort of compiling the stories and everything for this, what were you prioritizing in terms of like what you wanted to include and the order you wanted to put them in and everything?
So the concept seems like a very broad one, but when we got right down to it, we had the limitation of, originally there were going to be previously published stories. So we didn't put out a call for submissions. We didn't, enlist anybody's new stories. So we went digging around to see what there was, and we of course had a couple already in the back of our minds. So Stephen King had just finished reading The Horror of the Heights, which I think was really what got lit the fire under him to do this. And of course, we both knew the Matheson story. Who's been on the Twilight Zone numerous times. But then it was just a matter of looking around. And what we discovered was it's actually a fairly narrow genre, sub-genre.
Yeah.
We didn't find, I would say we didn't find anything that we thought fit the brief that we discarded. there was not an abundance of possibilities. And in the aftermath, there's only one story that I'm sorry that we didn't find at the time that we would have included, one additional one, a Rick Hautala story, which funnily enough was published in Cemetery Dance. So, you know, Cemetery Dance published the original hardcover of this. And I regret that we didn't get that one. But as a result, we ended up with a fairly narrow demographic of writers. It's all male authors, all, I guess I would say all white male authors. And we got some criticism for that, but the reality was we didn't find anything else. And we did put out some calls, you know, on social media saying, you know, if you know a story that fits, you know, it's a scary flying story, you know, let us know and we'll be happy to consider it. But we just didn't get anything more than what's in the book.
Yeah, if you're going on an existing pool of published works, like what exists, I suppose. I have this problem with my website because I really try to balance the books I review in terms of authors. I try to make sure I'm representing everyone as best I can. But in terms of review requests for books, I'd say about at least 90% of my requests are from white straight men, and then 10% everybody else. So I do try, but it's the that's about the proportion of what I'm asked to do. So with my own personal reading, I try and make an effort to make sure I'm reading a variety of people, but it's quite hard. Like the actual review pool I've got, I'm like, oh, come on, everyone. Like, I do try to encourage everybody to submit stuff for me to read, though, because I do prefer to read a wider range of authors, because you get more different types of stories and everything to enjoy. Absolutely. But it's a really good anthology of stories, though, because surprisingly for a theme like that, they are all quite different for the million ways that things can go horribly for you on a plane. I'm scared of flying, so it was very horror-like for me. And I did enjoy your zombies on a plane. I have to say, zombies is my favorite subgenre of horror, so that was right up my street, and also funny because you would be doomed.
Yes, yeah, and I thought, well, how do you write a zombie story without really having a whole lot of zombies? And you know, yeah. they're sort of in the background. It's the reality of what these people are living through, but mostly it's a Langoliers type story. It's, you know, a bunch of people trapped together trying to, you know, survive essentially. Yeah, that was one that I had written along maybe 10 years even before that. So I was glad to see it get pulled out from its rather obscure initial publication into something with a wider audience.
Yeah, and it fit perfectly with the theme here too as well.
Well, you know, I sent it to Steve just as never even really thinking that he might want to include it, just to say, oh, you know, here's my scary airplane story. And he said, oh, yeah, we got to put that one in. And that was the only story that he told me I had to write the introduction for. He did the introductions for all the other ones.
Yeah, I felt like a lot of work went into this anthology, and like the order all the stories are placed in as well. I try not to do it I try to dip in and out of anthologies and read like one story a day, but if they're good, I end up just going through the whole book. And I actually remember buying it because I went through a patch of I couldn't afford books for a little bit, and then the second that I could, it was like the first thing I bought. I really enjoyed it. You do editing work for Cemetery Dance as well, don't you?
Well, they called me a contributing editor. What that means is I write an essay for them. So I don't do any editorial work in that sense. But I've been writing News from the Dead Zone for them since about 2000. So that's where they call those people contributing editors. And we do it in the magazine. It's been in virtually every issue of the magazine since then. Plus, we do an online version of it at newsfromthedeadzone.com, which is more up to date because the publishing timeline has gotten slower and slower with the magazine over the years.
I always wonder how you have enough, like how I've just got a theory that you don't sleep, because your output for your non-fiction and your fiction is very regular. and you do so many different things, and then I'm like, but you also have like life as well, like so I just don't know how you, I marvel, I just don't know how you do it.
It's amazing how much you can get done in 2 hours every day, Monday to Friday, plus the time that you can find on the weekends as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, so I have this book, the Stephen King Illustrated Companion from about 2008 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was given 6 weeks to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a matter of sitting down every day, casting everything else pretty much to the side and just working on that one. And in 6 weeks, I got the book turned in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can write a short story in 2 or 3 days, really get it done in a week. A novel, though, is a good 6 to 9 months, which is why I tend, one of my problems is I get distracted by other things. And so I'll start working on this, and then I'll see an interesting call for an anthology. So I got to whip out a short story for that one. And I
Yeah.
really just sort of need to put my blinders on now and say, okay, I've got 15 short stories that are in the submission pile right now.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just keep recycling those as they get sent back, and maybe not write anything new for a while for short fiction. But then I've got these other things I have to do. The column for Cemetery Dance. I do an essay for Dave Hinchberger for his annual The Overlook Connection catalog calendar things. I've got to do one of those for him within the next 4 weeks. Yeah, so there's always little things. Plus, I like to write the odd book review for my website. And
yeah. Yeah, it's just you're a man on the go, Bev. You never stop. I do refer to you as the Stephen King expert as well. If anyone ever asks me for non-fiction book recommendations on Stephen King's work, which a lot of people ask me for that because I've read everything that Stephen King's written, and I always point them to you because you have covered so comprehensively over time his work. And I have this one, which is it's wonderful because you'd think that someone couldn't so comprehensively cover somebody's like career and life with the amount of detail you go into here, but you have, and you this is a slight tangent anecdote, Bev, but this is the funny. I think this is funny anyway. You were unknowingly at one point my nemesis because when I was at university and I was trying to land on my dissertation subject, first of all, I was definitely going to do something on Stephen King, and I pitched a couple of ideas, like project ideas, to my dissertation supervisor, and this guy knows more in the horror field than anyone I've ever met in my life. He has read, seen, and played everything, and he was like, oh, you can't do that, this guy Bev Vincent's done that. And I was like, oh, right. And then it happened the second time, and he was like, oh, someone's already done essays on that. And I was like, is it Bev Vincent again? Like, yeah. And I was like, but then that turned me into a fan, because then I just changed. I didn't end up writing about Stephen King in the end. I did The Walking Dead instead. But that's what started me off on your non-fiction stuff, because I like to read these things as well. Have we lost connection? Could you still hear me? Oh no. I don't know if you can hear me, Bev, but you've frozen for a sec, so I'm just going to wait a second. Oh, are you back?
Lost?
Oh,
I can hear you.
I can hear you again
I'm
now.
back. I'm back.
Oh, hi, Bev.
Okay,
sorry, I think we got. Yeah.
Sure.
Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes. I can hear and see you okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, you froze on my end then. I was like, how long was I talking? I thought that you'd just quietly passed out while I was rambling on about your book. I'm sure that you've already answered this, but just for people unfamiliar, where did your Stephen King interest really take off?
Well, I discovered him when I was in college
Mm-hmm.
in about 1979. I read Salem's Lot. Just by accident, I would almost say. I picked him up in a used bookstore among a stack of other things. And I've always been one of those people who, when I find something I like, I become a completist.
Mm-hmm.
I've read all the Hardy Boy books. I've read all the Agatha Christie's. I read all the Isaac Asimovs. And so I started on the Stephen King thing. But in 1979, there wasn't all that much to catch up on. He'd only had a handful of books by that point. And so it began sort of a lifelong interest in his books, and I've always, I mean, they were the first ones I ever bought in hardcover. As a poor, undergrad, it was a bit of an investment to pay $10, $12 back then for a hardcover.
Yeah.
But then in the 1990s, when the internet sort of became a thing, there were these news groups where people got together, a little bit like Reddit. And there was this one called Alt.Books with Stephen King. It was really, really active. People really, really wanted to get together and talk about his books, the plots, the characters, what's coming, what's been in the past, the movies, and all of that. And it was a place where I became active. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would call myself a little bit of a know-it-all, in the sense that if I don't know the answer to a question, I'll go look it up and then post the answer. And then people think I know more than I really do, but I know how to look things up pretty well. And so that sort of evolved into Rich Chismar asking me to write the Cemetery Dance column. Mm-hmm. And once that started, people were saying, when are you going to write a book about King's work? Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, my friend Bill Sheehan had written a really good book about Peter Straub's novels, but Straub only had at that time 8, 9 books. So it was, something manageable. And I thought, well, that's a PhD thesis. That's years of work. I can't imagine ever doing that. But then when I found out that Steve was going to finish the Dark Tower series, I thought, well, here is something manageable, which, I can write about the whole series. And it sort of also relates to the broader King oeuvre, if you want to put it that way. And so that became my first book, The Road to the Dark Tower.
Yeah, it's the only thing for me more fun than reading Stephen King's books is reading about Stephen King's work with someone who's like really well researched and stuff, because I like to, once I get in on an author, I like to know everything, and I want to know the context of why a thing was written and everything. And I'm like you, a bit like completionist like that, like which is why I have so many of your books, because it's like Pokemon, you've got to collect all of them, read them all. Yeah, do you have any other major interests that you just haven't explored in essays and nonfiction form?
Well, there are other writers who I've really liked, who I thought really deserved more of a critical evaluation, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So I wrote one time about Graham Joyce, the British author, who, what I really liked about Graham's books is that there were 2 different ways to read them. They could be supernatural, or the main character or characters could be suffering some mental deficiency, some delusion, something or other. And both of those readings sort of get intertangled in his work. And so I loved all of his books. I've read them all. And I wrote an essay that sort of covered his books, but the magazine that was going to publish it folded up, so I've never done anything more with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've written about Jack Ketchum some. I've written an essay about one of Thomas Harris's novels. Whenever things like that catch my fancy. So there was this book that the international thriller writers did not long after they got started. It was like 100 must-read thrillers. And I knew the guys who were editing it. And they asked me if I'd be interested in writing something, and I think their assumption was that I would write about the Dead Zone. And I thought, yeah, that's what people will expect of me, and so that's why I decided to do Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. I thought, this is this might take people a little bit by surprise and expand my horizons a little bit.
Yeah, I think that your nonfiction is really captivating because your passion for what you're talking about really comes through, and so it makes it even more interesting to read. So it's already a topic I'm interested in, but then it's like, I don't know, it's nice to share the enthusiasm with somebody who's like taken the time to write about it. And I'm an arts person, and when I was telling people that I was writing my dissertation for my degree on The Walking Dead, people were very confused. They're like, what do you mean? Like, how much can you say about The Walking Dead? I was like, oh, come on now. I mean, I've had to cut down my word count because I thought it really exceeded it. I was like, I could talk forever about like, the books and the authors and the screenwriters I enjoy. So I've had like this weird parasocial relationship with you for years where you didn't know I exist, but I just feel like I've got to like know you and your interests through your stuff, which is so, yes, once again, just like so thrilled to get to actually speak to you, because you're like a bucket list writer for me that I really wanted to get to talk to. So yeah, I really appreciate you being here, and I'll stop gushing about that now. Move on to my next question. What was my next question? I took myself off on a tangent then, Bev. I've embarrassed myself now. Oh, that was it. I was going to ask you about research. When you're putting something together for an essay or a topic for a book, do you ever come up against like roadblocks in your research where you just can't get to the answer for something? And like, how do you get around kind of things like that where you need details and you can't find them?
I've always, I mean, because of my work with cemetery dance, pertaining to King, I have kept a fairly extensive library of originally printouts. They're now all PDFs of essays and reviews and interviews. And so I can digitally research on my own hard drive just about anything pertaining to King that I want. Occasionally I have to actually go out to the internet, but for the most part, I have those things. And so when I was working on the new book, Stephen King, his work, life, and influences, when I was working on a particular book, I could find interviews that were contemporary with when those books were first published, which is what I was looking for. Because, even though somebody may talk about something they've written 20 years ago, memories change, details change, stories get built up that just become convenient stories. But if you can go back to the original sources, when they were interviewed right when the book came out, I think you get closer to the truth of what they were thinking about, what their inspirations were, what the stories surrounding them are. And so I just have megabytes, probably gigabytes of all that stuff, and it's all searchable, which is really cool. So it really makes my life easier. For other things, yeah, man, I'm a research scientist in my day job. I have a degree and a PhD in chemistry, and so searching and researching. There was one thing I remember talking with Brian Freeman. There was this quote that we'd seen passed around the internet. It was a King quote, but it's everywhere, and if you search for it, you can find it everywhere. But there's no attribution to it, and we could not figure out where it came from. And we both kept saying, "Oh, it sounds like maybe it was in Das Macabre, or maybe it was in this interview," and we never did find out where it came from. And we've come to the conclusion that probably is not a real literal quote. It's something somebody's cobbled together from bits and pieces and then turned it into a quote. But now it's on the internet, so it's going to live forever.
Yep, it's just been like paraphrased so many times that the source is gone now. Oh, that's interesting that you have that you're in the sciences, because my cousin is I have two cousins that work in science. So one of them has a PhD, and I swear she can find things, anything you ask her. Like, I can't find a thing, and 2 seconds later she's like, here you go. And I'm like, what how you must be a team to like the research part of the answering questions part of life, just in general. Probably.
I've become a real proficient Googler. I know how to construct a really good narrow targeted search that gets me what I want most of the time.
Well, that's useful for when you're writing, essays and looking at topics for books and everything. I love that you have like basically a compiled digital encyclopedia, if you will, of all of your Stephen King things.
It used to be a whole file cabinet of printouts, and it was never quite so convenient to try to find something in that.
Yeah, just having to rifle through like actual papers must take forever. I remember still going to the library when I was a kid to get just anything. It's like unheard of these days. You could just get everything on your phone basically normally, but I still like the practice of finding actual papers and books. I'm a bit old-fashioned with my things. Got stacks of papers on just like notes from when got the original Alien script, and then like notes and stuff that went with it. And I collect like things like that. I don't know if I'm ever going to actually do anything with any of it, but it's just it's a side interest. I'm going to let you go soon before I waffle too more. But I do have one last question for you, which you're going to think is silly. But before we get to that, is there any of your own work that you'd like people to check out first if they're unfamiliar with you?
If they go to my website, I have a list of all of my short story publications, and I've got one section on that is the sort of the groups of stories. So there's the Kane stories, which have been published in a variety of different places, and then there's I sort of call them the gang that couldn't shoot straight, even though they don't carry guns, the inept criminals group, and so those are probably good entry points into my crime writings. But I would say The Dead of Winter probably is a really good one to show me at length.
Yes.
Yep. And the Ogilvy Affair, which is very inexpensive, nice little novella which you can dig into. Yep.
Yes. I wholeheartedly recommend those as well, Bev. They're great stories. We have a running ending segment on this channel for all the interviews where the item has changed, but there is a prize if you know what this thing is. It used to be this purple blob monster from a video game, and now you're going to think this is so stupid. So if you can guess what this is supposed to be, then you will receive a prize. I will send you something. But if you don't know, but someone in the comments can guess, then they get a prize. So this doesn't actually look like what it's supposed to be, but it was a gift. And it's supposed to be it's something from a very well-known franchise that you definitely know. Do you have any idea what this is supposed to be?
Well, I'm going to have to guess that it's supposed to be from the Dark Tower series.
It is not.
Obligated.
But yes, Paul Tremblay guessed Falcor from the Neverending Story, which they're both good guesses, because I wouldn't be surprised if someone guessed like Blame the Mono or even Oi for something that's gone horribly wrong.
Oi was what came to mind. But part of me was thinking I should just blow this so that we give the chance to somebody in the comments to win the prize.
I was fairly confident that you'd look at this and just think, what? Because there's only one element of this that is actually similar to the thing it's supposed to be. I don't really know what happened in the factory this was made in. But when we stop recording in a second, Bev, if you just don't hang up, I will let you in on the inner, but you're in the inner circle, and it will only be Paul Tremblay, myself, and you that have the answer to this mystery. So you'll be sworn to secrecy, and if someone suddenly guesses, I'll know that you told. So, okay. So, once again, I really can't thank you enough for being here and giving your time so generously and answering all of my probably slightly rambly questions, because I was very excited to talk to you. I will put the link for your website and all of the books we've discussed and everything in the description, so that anyone that wants to find you can check out your work and check out your website and your blog and all your work elsewhere. I'll link as much as I possibly can there for people to find easily. But yes, for now, we will sign off for everyone, and the standard goodbye here is bleat, because it's happy go horror. So,
Sure.
so we're going to say bye to everybody and bleat.